Eli Shelby woke to the pounding of hooves and the terrible certainty that his wrists were tied to something that was moving. He came up out of the dark in pieces, first the smell of horse sweat and leather, then the ache splitting his skull, where a jail guard's cudgel had caught him 3 nights before, then the cold bite of rope cutting into his forearms where they were lashed to the pommel of a saddle that was not his own. The world tilted and jolted beneath him. Trees streaked past in the moonlight like dark spears. His legs were bound at the ankle to a strap beneath the horse's belly, holding him fast to the animal's heaving side, and above him, close enough that he could feel the heat coming off her skin, rode the biggest, most dangerous-looking woman he had ever seen in his life. "You are awake," she said, without turning her head, in a voice like gravel dragged over iron. "Good, do not thrash, you will spook him." "Untie me," Eli croaked. His mouth tasted of blood and old fear. "Untie me right now." "No. I mean it. Let me go, whoever you—" His voice cracked as the horse leapt a fallen log and his stomach dropped with it, the rope biting deeper into his wrists. Behind them, distant but not distant enough, he heard shouting, torchlight flickering gold through the black trees, the baying of hounds. Saltmere's garrison, coming for him, or for her. "The knots are for your own good," she said, finally glancing down at him, and in the moonlight he saw her properly for the first time. A jaw broad and strong, skin the deep mottled green-gray of river stone, twin tusks curving up from her lower lip, catching the light like polished bone. Her hair was black and thick, braided back from her temples with strips of copper wire and small carved beads, and her eyes, when they found his, were a startling amber gold, sharp as a hawk's. She wore fitted battle leathers, dark and oiled, laced tight up a torso built for war and yet unmistakably a woman's, a leather cuirass molded to her chest and cinched at a narrow waist, vambraces carved with clan markings strapped to forearms corded with muscle. A war axe rode at her hip, its haft worn smooth by 1,000 grips. "You took a blow to the head in that cell. If I let you ride loose, you will fall beneath these hooves and die before I have use of you. So, you stay tied. Use of me." Eli twisted, trying to see behind them, trying to make his aching arms obey him. "Who in the 9 hells are you?" "Murbul Gorehorn," she said, as if that settled everything, as if the name alone should have made the world quiet around them. "Raid captain of the Gorehorn clan, and you, shipwright, are the only man alive who might keep me from losing my head to a rope or my clan to a liar's tongue. So you will forgive me if I do not much care whether your wrists are comfortable." The hounds bayed again, closer now. Murbul cursed low in her own tongue, dug her heels into the horse's flanks, and the world became noise and speed, and the terrible intimacy of being tied against a stranger's saddle while she carried him, unwilling, into the dark. It had started 3 nights before that, though Eli had not known it at the time. He had been working late on the Mary Kestrel Asterisk, a fat-bellied trading cog with a rotted strake that needed replacing before the autumn tides turned foul, his hands blistered, and his lantern guttering low against the harbor fog. Saltmere was not a beautiful town. It clung to a gray stretch of coast where the Ashgate River met the sea, its docks a tangle of warped planking and tar-black pilings, its streets thick with the smell of fish guts and pitch. But it was Eli's town. In the quiet way a place becomes yours simply by being the only one that ever let you stay. He had come there at 19 with nothing but a chest of tools and a dead father's debts, and in the 9 years since he had built a name as a careful, patient hand, not the fastest shipwright on the wharf, not the loudest in the tavern, but the one men trusted to fix what could not be allowed to fail. He had no wife, no family left, a room above Coldwell's chandlery, a narrow cot, a stack of borrowed books he read by candlelight because he liked the quiet of them. He was 28 years old and had made his peace mostly with being a man other people looked past. That was the night the fire came. He heard the screaming before he saw the flames, a high, ragged sound rolling up from the south end of the harbor where the garrison kept its watchtower. He had run toward it instead of away, because that was simply the kind of fool he was, and had arrived in time to see 3 ships already catching, their sails going up like paper, and shapes moving through the smoke in crude hide cloaks, howling in a tongue that was almost orcish but not quite, swinging torches and hatchets with a wildness that seemed, even through his terror, somehow rehearsed. One of them had stumbled near him, cloak snagging on a mooring cleat, and as the man wrenched free, his boot came half off. A stitched leather boot, cobbler-made, human-made, the kind no orc raider had ever worn in Eli's memory of the old war stories his father used to tell. And from a tear in the man's cloak something small and bright had fallen, skittering across the planks to stop against Eli's boot. A bronze disc, stamped with a hawk and a chain, small as a thumbnail. He had bent to snatch it up out of pure animal instinct, and that was when the beam came down. He did not remember the blow. He remembered waking in the town jail 2 days later with his skull throbbing and Garrison Captain Wendell Rourke's face swimming above him, grim and unhappy, telling him that 3 ships were ash, that the harbor watch captain was dead, that witnesses had heard orc voices and seen orc shapes fleeing north toward Gorehorn land, and that Eli himself had been found unconscious not 30 feet from the fire's heart with an orc-make skinning knife planted, though he had no way to prove it lying beside his hand. Lord Corvin Ashworth, who held the harbor charter and half the town's debts besides, had been the one to name him, consorting with raiders. Perhaps worse, the town, frightened and grieving, had been glad enough to believe it. Old Bram Coldwell, the master shipwright who had taken Eli in as a boy, had shouted himself hoarse in the square trying to defend him. But fear is louder than reason in a burning town, and Eli had spent 3 nights in a cell with a bronze token still hidden in his boot, wondering if he would hang before anyone thought to ask him a single honest question. He had not known, in that cell, that 30 miles north, in a war camp of hide tents and cook fires, a raid captain named Murbul Gorehorn was staring down a bounty notice with her own face crudely sketched upon it, and that a rival with his eye on her clan's leadership was already smiling at the news. The chase lasted the better part of that first night. Murbul rode them hard through the tree line, doubled back twice through a shallow ford to break the hound's scent, and did not slacken pace until the torches behind them had shrunk to distant, drowning sparks and finally winked out altogether. Only then did she bring the horse down to a walk, its sides heaving, steam rising off its dark hide into the cold air. "You could have said something before dragging me out of a cell," Eli managed, once he trusted his voice not to shake. His shoulders burned, his wrists were raw, but he realized with some surprise, more alive than he had felt in 3 days of staring at stone walls waiting to be hanged. There was no time for pleasant conversation. "Your garrison was 3 minutes from putting a rope around your neck for a murder my clan did not commit." Murbul's amber eyes cut sideways to him, assessing, and something in her stiff shoulders eased fractionally. "You are the man who saw the boot." Eli went very still. "How do you know about that?" "A rat in your garrison talks for coin, same as rats everywhere." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, tusks catching moonlight. "He said a shipwright babbled about a Hawkan chain token before he was struck senseless and thrown in irons. My scouts have seen that same mark before, shipwright. On the collar of a mercenary company that answers to a certain harbor lord who would very much like my clan blamed for a fire we did not set. Ashworth." The name tasted like ash in Eli's mouth. "You know him. He holds the paper on half the docks in Saltmere. If the harbor burns and the orc clans get blamed for it, the crown gives him leave to push the Accord line back 100 miles and take the timber rights along with it." Eli's mind, slow with pain and fear only minutes before, was suddenly working fast, turning the pieces the way he'd turn a rotted hull plank, looking for the crack that explained the hole. "You think he hired men to dress like raiders and burn his own harbor?" "I do not think. I know in my bones the way I know a false step on a battlefield. But knowing is not proof, and proof is the only coin that buys back a life." Murbul reined the horse to a full stop at last beside a shallow creek, the water black and silver under the moon, and swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion, boots crunching frost-stiff grass. She came around to Eli's side and without a word of warning, drew a wicked little belt knife and cut the rope at his ankles. He nearly fell. She caught him one arm, hard as a ship's timber, wrapping around his ribs and setting him upright as though he weighed nothing at all. And for a dizzy moment Eli was aware of nothing but the strange, unwelcome comfort of being held by something so much stronger than himself. "Steady," she said low. "You are no use to me broken." "I'm starting to think," Eli said, once his knees agreed to hold him, "that being of use to you is a dangerous position to be in." Murbul's tusked mouth curved into something that was, unmistakably, amusement. "You have no idea, shipwright." She cut the last of the rope from his wrists but did not apologize for the raw red marks it left behind. Orcs, he would learn, did not much traffic in apology. They dealt in reasons, and hers, at least, had the terrible virtue of being true. They reached the Gorehorn war camp 2 days later, coming down out of the pine hills into a wide valley thick with hide tents and cook smoke, banners of bone and dyed wool snapping from spear-topped poles, the whole camp alive with the sounds of a people who had never once needed to hide what they were. Eli rode this time with his wrists free, but a length of rope still knotted loosely to his belt and looped through Murbul's saddle horn, her concession, given grudgingly, to the fact that half her clan would put an arrow through a lone human wandering their camp before he'd said 3 words. The reception was every bit as bad as he'd feared. They had not gone 20 paces past the outer picket line before a broad-shouldered orc with a jaw like a hatchet blade and a long scar bisecting one tusk stepped into their path, flanked by 4 warriors with spears already lowered. "Murbul." The scarred orc's voice was a low rumble, thick with contempt as his eyes slid over Eli. "You bring a human filth into camp while a bounty rides on your own name. Have you lost what little sense the ancestors gave you? Mind your tongue, Scrag." Murbul's horse did not so much as flinch at the spears. Neither, Eli noticed, did she. "This human is the proof that clears my name and yours besides, if you had the wit to see past your own ambition. I see a woman who has shamed the Gorehorn line with a false accusation and now drags a human pet through our camp to make it worse." Scrag's lip curled back from his tusks. "The moot is called for the first snow. Clear your name by then, Murbul, or step aside, and let a raid captain who has not been branded a liar and a raider of her own harbor lead this clan into the winter." "I will clear it," Murbul said, and there was iron in it, absolute and unshaking, "with proof, not with your spear in an unarmed man's back. Touch him, Scrag, and you will answer to me before you ever see the moot fire." For a long, taut moment nobody moved. Then Scrag spat at Eli's boot, a deliberate insult, and stepped aside, his warriors lowering their spears with visible reluctance. Murbul did not relax until they were well past, deep into the heart of camp, and even then her jaw stayed tight as forged steel. "Friend of yours?" Eli asked, mostly to fill the silence because his heart was still trying to climb out of his throat. "My cousin," Murbul said. "And the man who would very much like me dead before the snow falls, so that the Gorehorn banner passes to him instead." They gave Eli a tent at the camp's edge, near the picket lines where the horses were kept, which he understood plainly enough to mean near enough to watch, far enough to matter little if something happened to him. He did not sleep well the first night, listening to unfamiliar voices in an unfamiliar tongue, the crackle of cook fires, the occasional low howl of something wild in the hills beyond. It was Murbul near midnight who came and sat outside his tent flap uninvited, sharpening her axe by firelight, and did not leave until the sky began to gray. "You didn't have to do that," he told her on the second night when she came again. "Do what?" "Sit guard over me like I'm something worth guarding." Murbul's whetstone paused against the axe blade. She looked at him for a long moment, firelight catching gold in her eyes, and something in her stern face shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, the way a locked door might swing an inch on old hinges. "You are the only proof I have that I am not a liar and a murderer of my own people's fragile peace, shipwright. I would guard a sack of gold that valuable. Do not make more of it than that." Wouldn't dream of it, Eli said, though something in his chest foolishly already had. She snorted an oddly delicate sound from a woman who could likely break him in half, and went back to her whetstone, and Eli found himself watching the firelight move over the strong lines of her face far longer than was strictly necessary for a man merely being *guarded. It was Murbul who proposed the dares, though she did not call them that at first. 3 days into his stay, with the whole camp still eyeing him like a stray dog that might carry plague, she'd found him sitting apart from the cook fires, picking at a bowl of some spiced boar stew he did not trust and Scragg's people plainly hoped would poison him. "You will never earn their trust cowering at the edge of the fire like a whipped pup," Murbul said, dropping down onto the log beside him with the easy, unthinking grace of a woman used to her own strength. "Eat the stew, all of it. If you can keep it down before the whole fire, I will tell you a thing about my clan you do not know." "That an offer or a threat?" "Both," she said, tusks flashing in a grin that did something unfair to Eli's pulse. "Orcs respect nerve, shipwright, not manners. Prove you have some, and this will go easier for you." He ate the stew. It was, in fact, extremely good, though he suspected she'd known that, and simply enjoyed watching him sweat over the first bite. The clan laughed not unkindly for once, when he finished the bowl and asked, with what dignity he could muster, whether there was more. That was the first dare. It was not the last. 2 days after that, with a crowd of curious warriors gathered loose around the practice yard, Murbul dared him to last 30 heartbeats against her in a sparring bout with wooden practice blades. Not to win, she said, only to not fall down weeping *, though he ended flat on his back in the dust twice, the second time laughing despite the bruise blooming on his hip. The watching orcs began, grudgingly, to nod. "You fight like a man who has never once thrown a punch that mattered," Murbul told him afterward, offering a hand to pull him upright with an ease that made him feel, not for the first time, delightfully insignificant beside her. "I fix ships," Eli said, dusting himself off. "Nobody's ever dared a plank to punch back. A pity. You have good instincts, wrong ones for a fight, but good ones." She studied him, head tilted, hair beads clicking softly. "Tomorrow's dare, ride Scarn." Scarn, it turned out, was the biggest, meanest, most spectacularly ill-tempered warhorse in the entire camp. A black brute that had thrown 3 orc riders that season alone. Eli lasted 4 seconds before landing in a mud puddle to the raucous delight of half the war camp, but Murbul had laughed. A real laugh, head thrown back, tusks bright in the sun, and something about being the reason for that sound had made the mud and the bruised tailbone entirely worth it. "You are ridiculous," she told him, still grinning, hauling him up out of the mud by one arm. "You dared me. I did not think you would actually try it." There was something warm underneath the teasing now, something that made her amber eyes linger on his face a beat too long. Most humans would have refused, called it beneath them, or too dangerous, or simply been too proud to be laughed at. "I'm not most humans," Eli said, and meant it as a joke mostly, except that when her gaze caught his and held, the joke seemed to evaporate somewhere between them, leaving only the fact of how close she was standing, how the morning light caught the strong plane of her jaw, how he had, somewhere in the space of a week, stopped being afraid of her and started being something else entirely. "No," Murbul said softly, and there was nothing teasing in it now. "I am beginning to see that you are not." The dares kept coming, each one a little bolder than the last, and Eli understood dimly that they were no longer only about proving himself to a suspicious camp. Somewhere along the way they had become a game only the two of them played, a slow circling dance of nerve and challenge that let them say things neither of them was yet brave enough to say plainly. She dared him to drink the fermented mare's milk liquor the elders brewed for festival nights, and laughed until she wheezed when he turned an alarming shade of green. He dared her back, emboldened by the drink, or perhaps simply by 3 weeks of her steady, fierce presence at his side, to tell him one true thing about herself that no one else in camp knew. Murbul had gone quiet at that, staring into the fire for a long moment before she answered. I have never once in 30 summers met a man, human or orc, who did not either fear me or want to own me. You do neither, that is the true thing. Her eyes had found his across the flames, unguarded in a way he had not yet seen from her. I do not know what to make of it. Maybe, Eli had said, throat tight, I just want to know you, that's all. That is a dangerous want, shipwright, more dangerous than any dare I have set you. Dare me to stop, then. Murbul had not answered that. She had only reached across the space between them, calloused fingers brushing his jaw with a gentleness that seemed to startle her as much as it did him. And for a long, breathless moment neither of them moved, the fire crackling, the camp noise falling away to nothing. Then a scout had come running with word that Scrag was stirring trouble among the elders again, and the moment broke, and Murbul was on her feet and moving before Eli had even caught his breath, but she'd looked back once, at the tent flap, and the look had said everything her pride would not yet let her voice. The trouble, when it came fully to a head, arrived on a gray, wind-scoured morning with word from one of Murbul's scouts, a wiry, quick-eyed orc named Thok who had been quietly working Saltmere's taverns for coin and gossip. Ashworth's men move a wagon south along the old timber road tonight, Thok reported, crouched by the war council fire with Murbul, Eli, and the clan's aging shaman, an orc woman named Vashna whose face was a roadmap of old scars and older wisdom. Ledgers, Murbul. Payment records. A man in the crooked anchor swore he saw hawk and chain tokens paid out to 5 men the very week the harbor burned. That's the mercenary company, Eli said, leaning forward, the fire's heat doing little to warm the cold certainty settling in his chest. If there's a ledger showing Ashworth paid them the same week the ships burned, that's not a rumor anymore. That's proof. Vashna's ancient eyes moved between them, sharp as flint despite her age. The moot fire is called at first snow, Murbul. 12 days. Scrag already whispers to the elders that you hide because you have no defense. If you do not bring proof before that fire, he will demand the challenge, and you know as well as I what that means. Trial combat, Murbul said grimly, for Eli's benefit. To the yield or to the death at Scrag's choosing. He will choose death, he always does. Then we get the ledger, Eli said before he'd fully thought through what he was volunteering for. Before the moot, I know that road. I've hauled timber along it for Coldwell's yard a dozen times. There's a way to come at that wagon from the river bluffs where the guard can't see. Murbul's gaze fixed on him, something fierce and unhappy warring in it. It is a fool's risk. If Ashworth's men take you again, they will not bother with a jail cell this time. Then don't let them take me, Eli said simply, and held her eyes until, at last, something in her rigid shoulders yielded. Fine, Murbul said. But you ride with me, shipwright, and when I say run, you run, and when I say stay behind me by every ancestor watching, you asterisk stay behind me. Is that understood? Understood, Eli said, though even then he suspected he would not be very good at following that particular order. They struck the timber road 2 nights later, Murbul, Eli, and 3 of her most trusted warriors moving like shadows through the pines above the old logging track, the wagon's lantern light a small yellow smear far below on the winding road. It went wrong almost immediately. A guard dog picked up their scent on the wind, barking wild alarm, and what should have been a quiet theft became, in the space of a dozen heartbeats, a running fight. Eli would remember it after only in flashes, Murbul's axe catching torchlight as she cut down 2 mercenaries in the road like a woman clearing brush, Thok dragging the strongbox with the ledger free from the wagon bed, while arrows hissed past his ear. The wagon driver, panicked, whipping his horses into a bolt straight for the river bluff road with the ledger still half tangled in the reins where Thok had dropped it in the chaos. The ledger. Eli shouted, and without thinking, without any thought at all beyond the fact that 12 days of Murbul's life hung on that single scrap of proof, he threw himself onto the back of the bolting wagon as it careened past, fingers screaming as he hauled himself up over the tailgate. Eli! Murbul's roar cut through the night, raw with a fear he had never once heard in her voice before. She was already spurring her horse alongside the runaway wagon, but the road ahead bent hard toward the bluff edge where it dropped 40 feet to the black, churning river below, and the terrified horses were not slowing. Eli got his hands on the strongbox, ledger and all, just as the wagon's front wheel struck a rut and the whole frame lurched sideways, timber groaning, wheels screaming against stone. The bluff edge rushed up ahead, a black nothing beyond the last 20 feet of road. Jump! Murbul was alongside now, leaning impossibly far from her saddle, one arm outstretched, her horse matching the wagon's mad pace stride for stride along the narrow track with the river gorge yawning on the other side. Eli jumped to me now. There was no time to think about whether it was possible. There was only the bluff, and the wagon tipping, and Murbul's arm reaching, and Eli threw himself sideways off the disintegrating wagon bed, with the strongbox clutched to his chest, just as the whole wreck went over the edge in a shriek of splintering wood and screaming horses. Her arm closed around his ribs like an iron band, and for one dizzying, weightless heartbeat they were both airborne, off the very lip of the bluff themselves as her mount's hooves lost purchase on the crumbling edge. And then they were falling too, horse and rider and man locked together, plunging into the black river below in a single desperate, tangled arc. The cold hit like a wall of stone. Eli went under, the current seizing him, the strongbox nearly torn from his grip, and for one terrible moment he lost all sense of up or down, of Murbul, of anything but the roar of water in his ears. Then a hand closed around the back of his collar, hauling with impossible strength, and he broke the surface gasping into cold night air with Murbul's arm locked around his chest, kicking them both toward the far bank while her horse swam alongside, riderless reins trailing. They dragged themselves onto the mud of the far shore in a heap, both of them coughing river water, both of them alive, the strongbox somehow still clutched in Eli's white-knuckled grip. "You absolute fool," Murbul gasped, hauling him upright by the front of his soaked shirt, her face inches from his, fury and terror and something far more raw all tangled together in her amber eyes. "I told you to stay behind me." "I got the ledger," Eli managed, teeth chattering. "I do not care about the ledger." Her voice cracked, actually cracked, and Eli realized with a lurch that had nothing to do with the cold that Murbul Gorehorn, raid captain, feared warrior of the Gorehorn clan, was shaking, not from the river, but from having watched him go over that bluff and not known, for one endless heartbeat, whether he would come back up. "Do you understand what I felt watching you throw yourself off that road? I have led warriors into 100 fights, shipwright. I have watched good soldiers die and felt only grief, clean and simple. What I felt watching you fall was not grief. It was," she stopped, breathing hard, water dripping from her braids, and Eli, cold and bruised and utterly, hopelessly in love with a woman who could break his spine with one hand, closed the last distance between them and kissed her. She made a small, startled sound against his mouth, and then her hand fisted in the wet fabric of his shirt, and she kissed him back, fierce and hungry, and entirely without the caution either of them had spent 3 weeks pretending to feel, there on the muddy riverbank in the cold, with a wooden strongbox of stolen evidence between them and the whole world still trying to kill them both. "That," Murbul said, finally pulling back just far enough to speak, her forehead resting against his, "was a dare I did not set you." "Consider it a gift, then," Eli said, and kissed her again, and this time she laughed against his mouth, low and warm, before giving herself over to it entirely. They made it back to camp 2 days later, soaked, exhausted, triumphant, the ledger dried carefully by the fire each night and guarded like the crown jewels of some human kingdom. Vashna pored over the water-stained pages by lamplight, her old face grim with satisfaction. "Payments," she said, tapping a smudged line of ink, "to 5 names the week before the burning. Hawk and chain seal beside each one, same as the token the shipwright carries." "This is proof enough to shame Ashworth before his own crown, Murbul, let alone before the moot fire." "Then we bring it before the moot," Murbul said, "and end this before Scrag can turn one more elder against me." But Scragg, it seemed, had already sensed which way the wind was turning, and Scragg was not a man to lose gracefully. He struck 3 nights before the moot, while Murbul was away at the eastern picket line settling a dispute among the horse guards. Eli was alone at the tent's edge, oiling a saddle strap by lantern light out of nothing more than habit and restless hands, when 3 of Scragg's warriors came out of the dark and put a sack over his head before he could so much as shout. He woke bound again, and this time the irony was not lost on him even through the pounding fear to a chair post in Scragg's own tent, wrists lashed tight behind him, a rope around his throat loose enough to breathe but tight enough to promise it would not stay that way if he struggled. "You are a clever little rat," Scragg said, crouching before him, tusked mouth curled in cold amusement. "Clever enough to nearly cost me everything with that ledger of yours. But a rat is still a rat, and rats can be sold." He held up, almost lazily, a small mirror-bright token, the twin of the one still hidden in Eli's boot. "Ashworth's men pay well for a loose end tied off before it can talk before a moot fire. I think I will sell you to them myself, shipwright, and let Murbul explain to the elders why her precious proof simply vanished." "She'll come for me," Eli said, and was proud of how steady his voice came out despite the rope at his throat. "You know she will. You've seen what she is when someone she cares for is threatened. I have seen a woman make a fool's mistake, softening for a human pet," Scragg said, standing, contempt thick in every line of him. "It will be the last mistake she makes." He was still gloating, still savoring his own cleverness, when the tent flap tore open and Murbul came through it like a landslide. She did not shout a challenge. She did not give Scragg the courtesy of a warning. She simply crossed the tent in 3 strides and drove her shoulder into his chest with the full weight of her charge, sending him crashing back through the tent's support pole in a collapse of hide canvas and splintering wood, and then her axe was in her hand and her boot was on his throat before he'd finished falling. "Touch him again," Murbul said, voice low and terrible, "and I will not stop at the yield." Scragg, wisely, went very still. She left 2 warriors to bind him and turned instead to Eli, dropping to her knees before the chair post, and there was something in the way her hands shook Murbul Gorehorn's hands, which Eli had watched throw an axe with deadly, unerring calm, as she drew her belt knife and cut the rope from his wrists, the very same knife that had cut his bonds on that first terrified night beside a moonlit creek. "I am sorry," she said, low, rough, her forehead pressed briefly to his once his hands were free. "I should never have left you alone even for an hour." "You came," Eli said, cupping her jaw in both his raw, rope-marked hands, "and that's what matters. You always come." "Always," Murbul agreed fiercely. And this time when she kissed him, it was in front of the whole gathered, gawking crowd of her clan, tusks and all, without a shred of care for who saw. And something about the way she claimed his mouth so openly, so unashamedly, told Eli plainer than any words could that whatever this had become between them, she had no intention of hiding it any longer. Scragg was stripped of his rank before the elders that very night, his conspiracy with Ashworth's men laid bare, when Thok produced a second token one Scragg himself had taken as a bribe to slow Murbul's investigation, and let the accusation stand unchallenged long enough for him to claim the clan leadership uncontested. He was exiled from the Gorehorn banner before dawn, sent out into the hills with nothing but his weapons and his shame, and Vashna declared before the assembled clan that the moot fire, when it came, would speak of Murbul's innocence, not her guilt. But proof for the clan was not proof for the crown, and Saltmere still believed its harbor had burned at Orcish hands. "We finished this properly," Murbul said, the morning after Scragg's exile, standing at the edge of camp with the ledger wrapped tight in old cloth against her chest and the wind pulling at her braids. "Not with a raid, not with fear. We ride into your town, shipwright, in the open in daylight, and we lay this proof before your garrison and your lord both and let them see the truth for themselves." "They'll try to kill you on sight," Eli said. "You know that." "Then you will stand beside me and make certain they hear the truth before anyone's arrow flies," Murbul said, and there was no fear in her at all, only the same fierce, unshakable resolve that had carried her across a river and off a bluff and through her own cousin's betrayal. I did not survive all of this only to hide from a town of frightened humans, Eli Shelby. I mean to walk back into Saltmere with my head high, and I mean to walk in beside you." They rode into Saltmere on a cold, bright morning with the first hard frost silvering the rooftops, Murbul in her battle leathers with the ledger bound across her back, Eli beside her on a borrowed horse, Vashna and 2 Gorehorn warriors trailing behind bearing no weapons drawn, only a white cloth of parley knotted to a spear. The town turned on them exactly as expected. Word spread through Saltmere like the fire that had started it all, and by the time they reached the market square a crowd had already gathered, ugly and frightened, men with pitchforks and fish knives, someone already shouting for the garrison, someone else throwing a rotten turnip that struck Murbul's shoulder and did nothing at all to move her from her course. There, a woman's voice, shrill with terror. "That's the raider. That's the one who burned the harbor, and the traitor rides at her side." Garrison Captain Wendell Rourke came shoving through the crowd himself, crossbow already half raised, his weathered face torn between duty and something that might, on another day, have been reason. "Murbul Gorehorn, you're under crown warrant for the burning of this harbor and the murder of Captain Ansel Red. Dismount, or I will not hesitate, Captain Rourke." Eli's voice rang out louder than he had known it could, and he swung down off his horse to stand directly between Murbul and the leveled crossbow, arms spread, chest heaving. "You've known me 9 years. You know I've never lied to you in my life. Listen to me before you loose that bolt, because if you kill her, you kill the only proof that Ashworth burned his own harbor to steal Orc timber land, and you'll have hanged an innocent woman for a crime his own coin paid to commit." A ripple of shocked murmuring ran through the crowd. Rourke's crossbow did not lower, but it did not rise either. "That is a serious accusation, shipwright. Then let me show you serious proof." Murbul swung down from her horse slowly, deliberately, both hands visible, and drew the ledger from its oiled wrapping, holding it out, not to Rourke, but to the crowd itself, turning in a slow circle so all could see the water-stained pages. "Hawk and chain, the same seal your Lord Ashworth's mercenary company wears on every collar and cloak-pin. Payment recorded the very week your harbor burned, to 5 men who dressed as my clan's raiders, and murdered your captain to start a war that would let one greedy lord steal land from both our peoples at once." "Lies," came a voice from the crowd's edge, smooth, cultured, cold-end Lord Corvin Ashworth himself pushed forward, richly dressed, his face a mask of practiced outrage. "An Orc raider forging documents to save her own neck, and a disgraced shipwright fool enough to help her. Captain Rourke, I demand you arrest them both at once." "There is one more piece of proof, my lord," Eli said, and reached into his boot, drawing out the small bronze token he had carried hidden through jail and river and betrayal alike. He held it up, hawk and chain catching the cold morning light. "This fell from a mercenary's cloak the night of the fire. I've carried it 3 weeks because I knew someone would eventually need to see it matched against your company's collars. Care to have Captain Rourke check your hired men's gear against it, my lord? Or shall we save the town the trouble, and let your own face answer for us?" Ashworth's composure cracked just slightly, just enough, a flicker of true fear beneath the outrage, and in a crowd grown suddenly, dangerously quiet, that flicker was as damning as any confession. "Search his warehouse," someone in the crowd called, old Bram Coldwell's voice, rough with 9 years of believing in a boy the town had thrown away. "If the shipwright's wrong, he'll answer for it, but if he's right, by God, we deserve to know it." Rourke made his decision in the space of a breath. He lowered the crossbow, turned it instead toward Ashworth, and 2 of his own garrison men, grim-faced, moved to flank the lord before he could so much as protest further. The search of his warehouse that afternoon turned up crates of hawk and chain tokens, Orc-style hide cloaks never worn by Orc hands, and a second ledger confirming every payment the first had promised. Ashworth was taken in irons before sundown. The bounty on Murbul Gorehorn was struck from every posting in the province before the week was out. The town did not warm to her all at once. Old fear does not melt in a single afternoon, however clean the proof. For days after Ashworth's arrest, Murbul walked Saltmere's streets to wary looks and doors that closed a little too quickly at her approach, and Eli walked beside her through every one of them, unwilling to let her stand alone in a place that had once tried to hang him for a lie. It was Bram Coldwell, in the end, who did more to turn the tide than any decree from Rourke or the Crown could manage. The old shipwright, gruff and plain-spoken, invited Murbul to the chandlery for supper within the week. Any woman who pulled my boy out of a burning jail and rode a horse off a cliff to save his fool life, he announced to anyone within earshot, is welcome at my table, orc or not, and the rest of you can mind your own business. And slowly, stubbornly, the town began to follow his lead. Murbul, for her part, surprised them all by staying. The clan moot, held under the season's first true snowfall, confirmed her as chieftain of the Gorehorn banner in Vashna's stead, the elders declaring her honor not merely restored, but strengthened by all she had endured to protect it. But rather than retreat entirely to the war camp, Murbul chose to Eli's quiet, disbelieving joy, to spend the harder months of winter in Saltmere itself, at his side, working out the first careful terms of a trade agreement between clan and town that neither Rourke nor the elders had ever quite dared to attempt before. You could have anyone, Eli told her one evening, weeks into that strange new peace, the two of them sharing a single bowl of Coldwell's fish stew by the chandlery fire, her leg pressed warm against his beneath the table in a way that still, after everything, made his heart do something foolish. Chieftain of your clan, feared across 3 provinces. You could have any warrior, anyone at all. Why me? Murbul considered the question with the same seriousness she gave to any matter of importance, setting down her spoon, turning to face him fully. Because you ran toward a burning harbor when every wise instinct told you to run the other way. Because you threw yourself off a bluff for a wet ledger and a woman you barely knew. Because you have never once, in all the time I have known you, asked me to be smaller, softer, less than what I am. And you have never once let me forget that you are worth standing beside, however the world first looked at you. She reached across the small distance between them and laid her hand over his, calloused fingers warm and sure. I have led warriors, Eli Shelby. I have been feared by men twice your size, but I have never once been chosen simply and honestly the way you chose me on that riverbank, soaked through and shaking with nothing to offer me but yourself. That is why. I'd choose you again, Eli said, throat tight, every single time, however many dares it takes. Careful, Murbul murmured, leaning close enough that her breath warmed his cheek, tusks grazing gently along his jaw in a gesture he had come to understand, among her people, as its own quiet claim. I may hold you to that. Dare you to, he whispered back, and felt her laugh against his skin before her mouth found his, unhurried now, certain. A kiss with all the desperate hunger of the riverbank settled into something deeper, steadier, a promise rather than a question. She marked him properly on the night of the first thaw in the old way of her clan, before a small fire behind the chandlery with only Vashna and Bram Coldwell as witnesses. It was not a wedding, not exactly, not in any shape the town of Saltmere would have recognized. There was no priest, no papers, no ring. But Eli understood, watching Murbul draw a fine line of dark clan pigment along his jaw and down the side of his throat with careful, reverent fingers, that it was every bit as binding as any vow spoken before an altar. Among my people, she told him quietly, the firelight painting gold across her sharp features, a warrior marks what she claims and will defend to her last breath. I have never marked anyone before, human or orc. I do not intend to ever mark anyone again. And what do I do? Eli asked, voice rough. How does a shipwright claim an orc chieftain? Murbul's eyes glinted, warm and fierce all at once. However he pleases. I'm not so traditional that I require ceremony from you, only honesty. She caught his hand, pressed his palm flat against her chest where he could feel the steady, powerful drum of her heart beneath the leather. Tell me the truth and it will be enough. I love you, Eli said simply, because it was the truest thing he had ever known. I have never once in my whole life felt as seen or as wanted as I do standing beside you. I don't care what the rest of the world makes of it. I choose you, Murbul Gorehorn. However many dares it takes, for however long you'll have me. Forever then, Murbul said, and kissed him beneath the thawing stars with a tenderness that belied every fearsome story ever told about raid captains and war camps, warm and slow and utterly unguarded. And Eli understood, with his heart entirely and gladly lost, that he had found in her not a captor's knot but a home he had never once thought to hope for. Spring came to Saltmere with the harbor rebuilt plank by careful plank, Eli's steady hands guiding the work alongside Bram Coldwell's. And with the first joint festival the town had ever held with the Gorehorn clan, a wide, noisy, half-suspicious, wholly hopeful gathering along the newly repaired docks where orc traders set up stalls of tanned hide and carved bone beside human stalls of salted fish and woven cloth. Murbul stood at the harbor's edge that evening, Eli's hand held loosely in hers, watching torchlight glitter on water that had once burned, watching townsfolk who had once thrown rotten turnips now trade laughter and coin with warriors they had once only feared. "You did this," she said softly, nodding toward the busy stalls, the mingling crowd, the whole unlikely piece stitched together out of proof and stubbornness, and one small bronze token carried 3 weeks in a jail cell boot. "We did this," Eli corrected, lifting her hand to press a kiss against her scarred knuckles. "Every step of it. I couldn't have cleared your name alone, and you couldn't have made this town listen without me standing in front of that crossbow. We did it together. That's rather the whole point, isn't it?" Murbul smiled a real smile, wide and unguarded, tusks and all, the kind she had learned slowly to let this small, stubborn human town see without flinching, and pulled him close against her side, solid and warm and entirely, permanently hers. "Together, then," she agreed, and turned her face up to the stars scattered thick above the rebuilt harbor of Saltmere, a raid captain's arm wrapped around a shipwright's shoulders, a season of fire and flight and fierce, hard-won love finally, gloriously, come home to rest.